The Uber driver that won't leave. Was chatting to a friend and remembered this creepy story from the pandemic. I, 30s F, lived alone. I had no car and no shops nearby. It was 9 p.m. and I'd got back from work and realized there was no food in the house, so I ordered a grocery delivery on Uber Eats. I asked them to leave it at the door due to COVID rules. There was a knock at the door, and I saw a tall, skinny guy standing right by it. I shouted through the letterbox to leave it on the floor and back up. He said no, and that he had to hand it to me as it had alcohol in it. I hadn't ordered any alcohol, so I told him he had the wrong order. He claimed it was correct. I told him sternly to put it on the floor and back up. Again, he refused. Stupidly, I was tired, opened the door a crack to tell him to do it due to COVID rules, and he stepped towards the door and put his hand on the handle. I pulled it shut and shouted to leave it or I was reporting him. He put it down and stepped back. I asked him through the letterbox to back up further. He did, but again when I opened the door he stepped forward. I always remember the chill down my spine when he said pretty, very pretty in a low monotone. I noticed he had his phone out pointed at me and asked what he was doing. He said he had to take a picture, but it was pointed at my face and not the bag on the floor. I grabbed it and slammed the door shut and locked it. I watched through a crack in the curtains as he stood by the door, pacing back and forth as if he couldn't make up his mind. He knocked, but I ignored it. I was getting seriously creepy vibes and called my best mate for advice. She told me to report him and not open the door. I shouted out the letterbox for him to leave, but he still stood there. My dog, who is normally the sweetest thing going, had picked up on my anxiety and began barking at the door. He turned and got into his car that was parked across the street from my house. I kept watching for the next 10 or so minutes through my window, but he wouldn't leave. He just sat there, but I figured maybe he was picking another order to take. Suddenly a message popped up on Uber. He told me he'd forgotten a bag in the car and asked me to come get it. I checked my order and it was all there, so I messaged saying it wasn't mine. He got insistent, saying he couldn't leave until I picked it up. He was practically begging me to come to the car, saying it wouldn't take a minute and I could grab it from the passenger side. I lost my shit. I told him I'd heard what he'd said, that I knew he was taking a pic of me and not the order and that I was calling the police. He still said I had to come get it. The entire time I was on the phone to the police, he was still messaging me, even saying the police not come. Pick up order and I leave. Why you making it hard? The police told me someone would be there within 20 minutes and to stay inside with the doors locked. My dog was going nuts, hackles up, barking. My neighbor's husband, who was 6 feet 4 inches and built like a brick shed, texted saying he heard a commotion and asked if I was okay. I told him what was going on and he immediately ran out, shouting at the guy that the driver was a predator and to fuck off, before he got fucked up. The delivery guy peeled out of there and my neighbors came over to make me a brew and wait for the police. I made a report to both them and Uber, but all I got was an apology from Uber. The police never came back to me. I got a car shortly after and didn't use Uber again until my boyfriend moved in. So, to the creepy predatory Uber driver, let's not meet again. The man in the raincoat. I've wanted to post/tell this story for years. And now I finally have a way to share it. This is going to be a long read, but it will tell you about the scariest experience of my life. TLDR version at the bottom. I was 15 years old living in a medium-sized city in North Florida, about 60,000 people, but some areas were really spread out and rural. Don't think of it like NYC or anything, more like a lot of houses spread out over a huge area and condensed shopping centers. I was a bit of a punk that my parents had a hard time controlling, so that meant I basically snuck out constantly and was always riding my bike around the city all hours of the night with my friends, fighting and constantly causing trouble. For reference, I was probably 5 feet 10 inches and 150 pounds. My next door neighbors were my best friends, let's call them Nick and Tim. Nick was younger than us and probably 5 feet 5 inches and 140 pounds, and Tim was 5 feet 8 inches and easily 210. Nick and Tim were brothers only a year or so apart. On that night, Tim had texted me around 1 a.m. asking me to ride bikes with him and his brother to his girlfriend's house so he can get lucky. I remember being hesitant because of how long the bike ride was. I just looked it up and it was 9.6 miles from my house to her street. But Tim begged and begged me to go until I agreed. Our city had a curfew, meaning any police in the area that saw you and assumed you were a minor would stop you and possibly issue you a ticket and bring you home. That meant we had to be careful about being seen by cars going by. Well, the bike ride to her house went by without any issues. We took our time, joked around, smoked a little pot, and genuinely just enjoyed the ride together. We ran out of what little pot we had on the way, and finally got to his girlfriend's house. After what felt like an hour, Tim snuck around the back to go in, and Nick and I just sat on an electrical box and talked. Maybe 30 minutes went by, and Tim triumphantly snuck out of the house bragging about his time in there and says we should head out. Annoyed at how long it took and nearly sober, we both agreed. The first mile of the ride went by smoothly. But things changed. We had just passed a decent-sized shopping center, closed, and a church. We rode by it slowly, in zero rush at all. After we passed it, it led to a long stretch of road with woods and canals on each side. The road name is Parkway, 2 lanes on each side separated by palm trees and landscaping in the middle. Sidewalks on both sides, and on the right side another road connects to the parkway. We were riding on the right-hand sidewalk. On the other side, we could hear the mumbling and scraping of his feet clearer. I could now see more details about him. He was smoking a cigarette and was probably 6 feet 5 inches. Had on a huge green backpack, was extremely skinny, had long gray hair, was wearing combat boots and blue ripped jeans, and that he had a full white beard. He didn't seem to notice us until we were directly across from him. We all had our eyes locked in his direction when he suddenly stopped walking, talking, and scraping his feet, looked up from the ground and let out this god-awful screech. It was like he tried to say 100 words at once. None of us knew what he tried to say. After the initial scream, I could make out, "What the F are you doing?" It startled us. We were now 25 yards away from him, and then he screams, "What the F are you looking at?" I was a foolish teenager. I piped up to say something smart, and Tim riding next to me grabbed onto me and said, "Don't say a damn word." So L didn't, and in hindsight I am so glad I didn't. He kept screaming in our direction, and we kept riding. The further we rode, the fainter the screaming got. Then, it stopped. We crossed the street again to the other side and made it about a mile down the road, all of us on edge. We glanced over our shoulders constantly to make sure he wasn't following us. We talked briefly about it, how strange it was, etc., but we were glad it was over with. Or so we thought. Nick and Tim were riding in front of me when I thought I heard something behind me. I turned around and there he was. Maybe an arm's length away, headed directly for me. The yellow raincoat hood was pulled up over his head and buttoned. This guy was standing up on his mountain bike pedaling as hard as he could. We locked eyes, and he started screaming. I mean screaming. He screamed not words, not any language, a fucking constant scream as loud as he could. I have the chills writing this even now, as a 25-year-old grown-ass man with a wife and a baby. If someone ever illustrated that image, and I saw it, I would probably have a panic attack. One screamed HES right behind us, and stood up pedaling as hard as I could. I think we all did. And he was right behind us the whole time, screaming. Every so often, he would get right on top of us, screaming and trying to knock us off of our bikes. I don't know how long we rode with him behind us, but it felt like eternity. I think age played a factor because he must have got tired and let us get ahead a bit. Exhausted, we pulled into a neighborhood and stared, cutting through yards trying to lose him. We jumped off our bikes and all just decided if he's still chasing us, we were going to make our stand together and fight. It was like a hive mind decision, all too tired to keep running. It was our only option. We waited for him, but he never came. I don't even remember hearing him. I still can't recall when we lost him. I called my house phone, waking both my parents up in the process, and told my dad about the situation. He told me to get home and figure it out. I asked to talk to my mother, and she yelled at me on the phone and refused to come pick us up as I stood in the middle of the street hoping this crackhead didn't come and kill us all. I got home, with Nick and Tim in tow, who asked if they could crash in my room. Of course I said yes. I think we all still have some weird feelings about that night, and we never really spoke of it again. I don't know what he wanted. He was clearly on drugs. But it makes me wonder if he would have robbed us, or worse. TLDR. Rode bikes in the night time. Crazy drugged up guy screamed at us and chased all around town on his bike. So yeah, Raincoat Man. Let's not meet. I think a guy at the bar drugged me. For context, I'm 25, and recently, I started going to this gay bar in my city. I've never really been into bar settings before now, and I've only gone a few times, usually by myself after work. This past weekend, I went to a gay bar in the downtown area of the city. I sat down at the bar and ordered a cocktail. Around 20 minutes went by, and this younger guy came and sat down next to me. He had dark brown hair and glasses, and appeared to be in his mid-20s. He didn't say anything to me, just ordered a beer and a double shot, and sat quietly sipping his beer. After a few more minutes, he finally spoke to me. He said, "So, do you come here often?" I told him that it was my first time and I don't normally go to bars. He asked me other questions like if I was by myself, what my sexual preferences were, etc. I was happy to be getting the attention from someone, and he honestly didn't seem like a bad person at all. We ended up talking for a while over several cocktails, and then he paid his tab and he said, "Wanna continue this over at my place?" Thought, why not, and I went with him to his apartment. Once at his apartment, he offered me a seat on his sofa and began to immediately feed his fish. Yes, he started to give off serious Dahmer vibes at this point, but hadn't done anything alarming yet. He offered me a drink and I accepted, and he went to his kitchen and came back a couple minutes later with 2 mixed drinks that he said was just vodka and Sprite. He turned on YouTube on his PlayStation and put on some old R&B from the 90s and started asking me more questions like what I did for a living, what my hobbies were, and eventually his questions got more personal and sexual. Eventually, I got really tired and became extremely lightheaded. I slumped over on the arm of the sofa, and when I woke up, I felt dazed and confused, and I was still on his sofa. He was standing over me, just watching me, and he had a knife in his hand. I was so out of it that I couldn't really react. I just remember saying, "Don't stab me please," and then, he said, "I'm not going to, I was just playing around." He set the knife down and helped me up off the sofa. Then he called me an Uber, and I got a ride back to my parents' house. I have not seen him again since, and never even exchanged contact info with him, thank God. I didn't file a police report either, since I can't really prove anything, and I know the cops in my city won't do shit. I just really hope I don't meet this weirdo again. Please, people, if you go out to bars/clubs, be careful who you trust and always go with a friend or relative or someone you know and trust.